A crystal chandelier hung above polished marble floors, reflecting a room full of witnesses who would remember the silence more than the laughter. Gabriel Whitaker raised his glass, smiling as he called his wife a beautiful woman who simply couldn't give him a legacy. The words landed softly but cut clean. Violet Whitaker did not react. She only watched as if memorizing something already finished. He believed he was speaking from a place of power. He wasn't, because the future he was begging for was already sitting across from him, quietly deciding. If you believe dignity should never be mistaken for weakness, stay with this story. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world, share your location and local time below. Subscribe if you think some truths don't need noise, just the right moment. The marriage between Violet Whitaker and Gabriel Whitaker had always been easy to misunderstand, especially from the outside. In photographs, they looked balanced. Gabriel stood slightly forward, shoulders squared, chin lifted with practiced confidence. Violet stood beside him, never behind. Never quite in front, her posture calm, her expression composed in a way that people often misread as softness. Together, they resembled what people in their circle admired most: stability, elegance, and quiet success. But the narrator, who had long since learned the difference between stillness and silence, knew something else entirely. Violet had never been passive. She had simply never been loud. She was the kind of woman who listened completely before speaking if she chose to speak at all. She remembered details others discarded, the exact wording of a conversation, the pause before an answer, the moment a tone shifted from honest to performative. Where others moved quickly, she moved precisely. Where others forgot, she recorded. Not always on paper, but often enough. Her upbringing had shaped that discipline. Violet Ellington, before she became Violet Whitaker, had grown up in a household where discretion was not a preference, but a structure. Her grandfather had built systems that outlived him. Her mother had taught her that influence, when real, did not need to announce itself. And Violet, from an early age, had learned that what was not said often mattered more than what was. She carried that lesson into her marriage. Gabriel, on the other hand, had always been understood immediately and incorrectly in a different way. He was charismatic in the way that made people feel included, at least for a moment. He knew how to hold attention, how to fill silence, how to turn uncertainty into confidence through sheer tone. In business meetings, he leaned forward just enough. At social gatherings, he laughed just a fraction louder than necessary. He gave people the impression of certainty, and most people, wanting certainty, accepted it. In the early years of their marriage, that confidence had felt reassuring. There had been warmth, then subtle but real. Conversations late into the night about plans, expansions, future homes, future children. Gabriel had spoken in outlines. Violet had listened in details. They had seemed for a time complementary. But time, as it often does, revealed what alignment could not sustain. The first fracture had not been visible. It rarely is. It came quietly through medical appointments and careful conversations, through test results that arrived in sealed envelopes and language that was always measured, always cautious, through phrases like low probability and unlikely without intervention, through the slow realization that what they had assumed would happen naturally might not happen at all. Violet absorbed that reality the way she absorbed everything else fully, without spectacle. Gabriel did not. At first, he had been supportive, attentive, present at appointments, quick to reassure. He spoke about alternatives, about time, about patience. He held her hand in waiting rooms and told her they would figure it out together. And for a while, he meant it. But support, when it is tied too closely to expectation, has a way of changing shape. Months became years. Procedures were attempted, then reconsidered. Hope became structured, scheduled, clinical. And somewhere in that slow erosion, something in Gabriel shifted, not all at once, but enough. He began to withdraw in ways that were difficult to name. Not absence, not exactly, but distance. He spoke less about the future they had once imagined. He redirected conversations toward work, toward expansion, toward things that could still be controlled. When friends asked about children, he deflected with humor. At first it was harmless, then it wasn't. The humor sharpened. It became edged almost imperceptibly at first. A comment here, a tone there, a joke that lingered a second too long. People laughed, because people often do. Violet did not. She listened. She noticed when his language shifted from we to something more ambiguous. She noticed when his pauses changed. She noticed how often he chose performance over truth in public settings. And she recorded it, not always in writing, but in the quiet, structured way her mind held patterns. Their friends, meanwhile, saw something simpler. To Ethan, Cole Gabriel's longtime business associate, Gabriel was ambitious and driven. If he was distracted at times, it was because success demanded it. Ethan admired that. To Melissa Grant, who moved easily through their social circle, Violet was elegant but distant. Hard to read, perhaps a little too reserved. Melissa had once described her as lovely but quiet in a way that makes you wonder what she's thinking. The answer, though no one asked it directly, was everything. Violet saw how conversations shifted when she entered a room. She saw how quickly assumptions formed around silence. She understood that people often filled in the gaps with whatever made them most comfortable. And she let them. Because correction requires energy. And energy, she had learned, was better spent where it mattered. What no one in their circle fully understood, what Gabriel himself had chosen not to understand, was that Violet had never needed the room to validate her presence. She had entered the marriage with far more than she displayed. Her family name Ellington still carried weight in certain circles, not the loud kind, not the kind that appeared in headlines, but the kind that shaped decisions quietly. Assets held through layered structures, influence embedded in institutions, long-standing relationships that did not require introductions. When she married Gabriel, she had chosen to step back from that visibility, not out of obligation, but out of intention. She had wanted a life that was built together, not one that overshadowed. She had allowed Gabriel to lead publicly because he wanted to, because it mattered to him, because at the time she believed he understood the difference between being seen and being secure. Over time, she realized he did not. Gabriel began to measure value in visibility, in recognition, in external confirmation. And as his business expanded, so did that need. He spoke more often about perception, how things looked, how they were received, how they were interpreted by investors, by peers, by anyone whose opinion could translate into opportunity. What he failed to notice was how that mindset began to reshape everything else, including his marriage. He no longer spoke to Violet the way he once had, not directly, not consistently. Conversations became transactional. Information replaced intimacy. Updates replaced dialogue. And occasionally, just occasionally, there were moments where something sharper slipped through. A comment about timing, about expectations, about things that had not gone according to plan. He never said it plainly, but he said enough. Violet never confronted him about those moments, not because she didn't hear them, but because she did, and because she understood something Gabriel did not yet realize. Patterns reveal themselves more clearly when uninterrupted. So she allowed the pattern to continue. She continued her routines. She attended events. She stood beside him in photographs. She responded when spoken to. She fulfilled every visible role expected of her. And quietly she observed. She noticed the increasing gap between what Gabriel said in public and what he did in private. She noticed the way his confidence intensified when he felt uncertain. She noticed how often he relied on assumption instead of verification. And she began slowly to organize those observations, not as accusations, but as records, dates, contexts, exact phrasing. Not because she intended to use them, but because she believed in being prepared for the moment when clarity would matter. That moment, though she had not yet defined it, was approaching. And while Gabriel continued to build his narrative outward toward investors, toward approval, toward a future he believed was within reach, Violet was building something else entirely. not a counter-narrative, not even a response, but a structure of truth that required no interpretation. She did not rush it. She did not announce it. She simply allowed it to form. Because unlike performance, truth did not need to be repeated to be believed. It only needed the right moment to be seen. Gabriel Whitaker believed in momentum. He believed that if something moved fast enough, if it carried enough confidence, enough visibility, enough carefully projected certainty, it would not be questioned. Not closely. Not in ways that mattered. That belief had built his business. And now, it was the only thing holding it together. Whitaker Development Group had once been described as promising. That was the word investors used in early meetings and cautious endorsements and polite introductions to larger networks. Gabriel had taken that word and stretched it into something larger, something that sounded like an inevitability. He spoke of expansion before stability had fully formed. He secured commitments based on projections that assumed success would arrive on schedule. He moved quickly and people followed because movement itself can be persuasive. For a time it worked. Projects broke ground. Contracts were signed. Numbers looked acceptable when viewed from a distance. Gabriel learned how to present those numbers in ways that felt complete even when they weren't. But distance, like momentum, has limits. The first signs of strain appeared in delays, small at first, then increasingly difficult to explain. A contractor issue here, a zoning complication there. Cash flow tightened, not catastrophically, but enough to require adjustments. Gabriel adjusted. He deferred payments, reallocated funds, shifted timelines. He told himself these were temporary measures, necessary corrections, in a business that was still growing into its full shape. He did not describe them as risks. Others did. Daniel Reeves, his financial advisor, had been with him long enough to recognize the difference between strategic flexibility and structural weakness. Daniel was not a dramatic man. He did not raise his voice or deliver ultimatums. He preferred clarity. Cash flow is narrowing, Daniel had said during one of their meetings, his tone measured, almost neutral. We can manage it, but only if the next phase is funded properly. Gabriel had nodded, already moving ahead in his mind. It will be, he said. The loan is practically approved. Daniel had paused not long, but long enough. Practically, he repeated. Has underwriting cleared the full review? Gabriel leaned back in his chair, folding one arm across the other in a posture that suggested control. They're finalizing details. Standard process. Daniel did not argue. He rarely did. But he made a note both mentally and in the documents he maintained, with quiet precision. Across the table, Lena Brooks, the project manager overseeing one of Gabriel's largest developments, remained silent for most of the meeting. She had built her reputation on execution timelines, logistics coordination. She trusted systems more than projections, and lately the systems were beginning to show strain. Invoices arriving later than expected. Requests for extensions that carried a different tone than before. Subcontractors asking more questions. Not openly concerned, not yet, but attentive. Lena noticed patterns. So did Violet. Though Violet was not present in those meetings, she did not need to be. Information, when structured properly, does not require proximity. She had access to enough of it, not through intrusion, not through interference, but through the quiet intersections of personal and institutional knowledge. Documents that passed through shared spaces. Conversations overheard without effort. Emails that revealed more in their phrasing than their content. And increasingly what she saw so did not align. Gabriel spoke of stability. The numbers suggested dependency. He spoke of near certainty. The timeline suggested urgency. He spoke of control. The adjustments suggested reaction. Violet did not challenge him. Not when he mentioned the loan casually over dinner, describing it as a final step. Not when he referenced future projects as if they were already secured. Not even when he began to speak with a kind of polished confidence that relied less on fact and more on expectation. She listened, and she began to organize. At first, it was simple. Dates of conversations, references to figures, mentions of commitments that had not yet been confirmed. She noted how often Gabriel used phrases like almost done or already in motion. She tracked when those phrases appeared and when they were repeated. Patterns emerged. They always do. There were inconsistencies, not dramatic, not obvious enough to trigger immediate alarm, but present. A number mentioned in one context did not match the number referenced later. A timeline shifted without acknowledgement. A detail omitted in one explanation appeared unexpectedly in another. Individually, they could be dismissed. Together, they formed something else. Violet did not assign intent to these discrepancies. Not yet. Intent requires conclusion, and Violet preferred evidence. So she continued. She created a private structure notes, organized not by emotion, but by sequence. Conversations aligned with dates. Statements paired with outcomes. Public claims compared against available documentation. She did not rush the process. She allowed it to develop at its own pace. Meanwhile, Gabriel accelerated. The loan he was pursuing had become more than a financial necessity. It was in his mind confirmation. A signal that everything he had projected outward confidence, growth, inevitability was not only believable, but real. He spoke of the bank with a kind of casual assurance. They've worked with projects like this before, he told Ethan Cole during a lunch that was meant to appear relaxed. They understand scale. They understand vision. Ethan nodded, trusting Gabriel's tone more than the details. "And you're good on approval?" Ethan asked. Gabriel smiled just slightly. "It's a matter of timing now." Timing. It was a word Gabriel used often. It suggested inevitability without committing to specifics. It implied control without inviting scrutiny. And it allowed him to move forward without pausing long enough to examine what stood beneath the surface. What Gabriel did not know, what he had never thought to question, was that the institution he spoke of so confidently was not as distant from his personal life as he assumed. Hawthorne National Bank did not advertise its internal structure. It did not attach names to influence in ways that could be easily traced. Its reputation was built on discretion, on stability, on decisions that appeared to emerge from process rather than individuals. Gabriel respected the institution. He did not understand it. Violet did. She understood its layers, its governance, its thresholds for risk. She understood how decisions moved, not quickly, not impulsively, but through systems designed to hold under pressure. She also understood something Gabriel did not. The review process for his loan had not reached certainty. It had reached concern. Internal risk summaries had begun to reflect inconsistencies, subtle at first, then increasingly difficult to ignore. Requests for clarification had been issued. Some had been answered. Others had been redirected. None of this was unusual in isolation. But in accumulation, it mattered. Violet had seen enough to recognize the direction. She did not intervene. She had made that decision early, and she maintained it. Conflict of interest was not a line. She would cross, not for Gabriel, not against him. But observation, that required no permission. So she observed. She noted when Gabriel's tone shifted after certain emails. She noticed when his confidence sharpened in response to delays. She recognized the pattern of someone who believed that outcome could still be shaped through projection alone. And she continued to build her record, not as leverage, not as defense, but as clarity. Because Violet understood something Gabriel had never needed to consider. When a narrative is built on assumption, it can be maintained for a long time. But when it meets structure, real structure, documented, verified, and patient, it does not collapse loudly. It simply stops holding. And when that moment came, it would not be Violet who raised her voice. It would be the record. The invitation arrived 3 days before the event, printed on thick ivory cardstock, its weight deliberate, its message understated. Gabriel placed it on the kitchen counter without comment, as though it were one more item in a sequence already decided. "It's Friday," he said later that evening, not looking directly at Violet. "Small dinner, just a few people." Violet glanced at the card, then at him. "A few," she asked quietly. Gabriel gave a faint smile. "You know how that works." "She did?" "Who's coming?" she asked. "Ethan, Melissa. A couple of people from the bank. Nothing formal. Nothing formal." The phrase lingered longer than it needed to. Violet picked up the invitation, running her fingers lightly along its edge. The host's name was printed in clean serif lettering: Clara Hastings, a name that did not appear casually on guest lists. Clara was not simply a social figure. She sat on boards that mattered, including one that intersected in ways most people did not fully understand with Hawthorne National Bank. Violet set the card back down. "I'll be there," she said. Gabriel nodded as if that had never been in question. The days leading up to Friday unfolded with a kind of controlled quiet that had become familiar in their home. Conversations were functional, schedules were exchanged. Information passed between them without weight. But beneath that surface, something else was forming. Gabriel approached the evening as an opportunity. He reviewed talking points and fragments, project updates, projected returns phrasing that suggested confidence without inviting scrutiny. He spent more time on his phone than usual messages sent and received in quick succession. When he spoke, it was often to himself, refining language, adjusting tone. He was preparing, not for a dinner, for a performance. Violet noticed. She noticed the rhythm of his preparation, the way he repeated certain phrases, the way he paused after others. She noticed how often he checked his watch, not for time, but for reassurance. She noticed how his confidence sharpened when he believed he was being observed, even when no one else was in the room. And she said nothing. On Thursday afternoon, while Gabriel was out, Violet sat at her desk, the soft glow of her laptop illuminating a screen filled with documents arranged in precise order. Her email inbox remained as it always was, clean, structured, filtered. One message, however, had been opened more than once. It had arrived earlier that morning from an internal address associated with Hawthorne National Bank. The subject line was neutral, almost deliberately so. Reloan Review, Whitaker Development Group. Violet read it again, not because she needed to, but because repetition clarified emphasis. The message outlined the current status of Gabriel's loan application. It referenced ongoing risk assessments, noted discrepancies that required further clarification, and indicated that the file had been escalated for additional review. The language was measured, but the direction was clear. This was no longer a routine approval process. Violet closed the email, then reopened it, this time focusing not on the content, but on the structure. Who had written it? Who had been copied? Which departments were now involved? Robert Klein's name appeared in the thread. Chief Risk Officer. That more than anything else mattered. Violet leaned back slightly, her expression unchanged. She did not respond. She did not forward the message. She did not print it. Instead, she noted the time, the phrasing, the escalation level. Then she archived it into a private folder, one that did not mix with anything else. Her phone remained silent on the desk beside her. She did not reach for it. There was no one she needed to inform, not yet. That evening, Gabriel returned home later than usual, his energy sharper, his movements more deliberate. "Friday's important," he said, loosening his tie as he stepped into the living room. "Clara's bringing in someone from underwriting. Senior level." Violet looked up from the book she hadn't turned a page of in several minutes. "Harold Bennett?" she asked. Gabriel paused just briefly. "Yeah," he said. "You've heard of him." Violet closed the book. "I've heard the name." Gabriel nodded, satisfied, as though the detail confirmed his own expectations. "He's the kind of person who understands scale," Gabriel continued. "Not just numbers vision. Vision." Violet let the word settle. "And you'll be speaking with him?" she asked. Informally, Gabriel said. "It's not a meeting, just conversation." "Just conversation?" Violet inclined her head slightly. "Of course." Gabriel studied her for a moment, perhaps expecting more questions, interest, concern. There was none, only stillness. He turned away, already moving on to something else. Later that night, as the house settled into its usual quiet, Violet stood in front of her closet, considering what to wear. Not carefully, not anxiously, but precisely. She selected a dress that did not demand attention, but did not disappear either. Deep navy structured with clean lines. No embellishment, no excess. It reflected what she preferred: clarity over decoration. She placed it aside, then turned off the light. On Friday, the day moved forward without interruption. Gabriel left early, his schedule full, his tone brisk when he spoke. Violet remained at home, longer her morning unhurried. She reviewed her notes, not all of them, just enough to maintain continuity. Dates aligned. Statements remained consistent. Nothing required adjustment. By late afternoon, she was ready. The drive to Clara Hastings' residence took them through streets that reflected a particular kind of wealth, quiet, established, unannounced. Large homes set back from the road, their presence defined more by proportion than display. Gabriel spoke during the drive, outlining points he intended to raise, refining language, even as he drove. "It's about positioning," he said. "They need to see where this is going, not just where it is." Violet listened. "They will," she said. Gabriel glanced at her briefly, perhaps reassured by the simplicity of her response. He did not ask what she meant. Clara Hastings' home stood at the end of a long curved driveway. Its exterior understated its interior, known for hosting gatherings that were anything but casual. As they approached the entrance, the soft glow of interior lighting spilled outward, accompanied by the low murmur of voices already gathered. Gabriel adjusted his jacket. "Just stay close," he said lightly. "It'll be easier." Violet met his gaze. "I always am," she replied. He smiled, not fully registering the weight of her words. Inside, the atmosphere was exactly as expected. Measured conversations, controlled laughter, the subtle choreography of people accustomed to influence without spectacle. Ethan Cole stood near the bar, already engaged in discussion. Melissa Grant moved easily between groups, her presence fluid, her attention selective. And near the center of the room, speaking with Clara Hastings, stood Harold Bennett. He was older than Gabriel, his posture relaxed, his expression attentive without being impressed. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, others adjusted slightly, almost imperceptibly. Gabriel noticed him immediately. "Give me a minute," Gabriel said to Violet. "I'll make the introduction." Violet nodded. "Take your time." Gabriel moved forward, his confidence settling into place as naturally as his stride. Violet remained where she was. She observed. She noted who greeted whom first, who deferred, who led conversations without appearing to. She noted the subtle shifts in Zyrus tone when certain names were mentioned. And then, as if guided not by urgency but by inevitability, her gaze moved to Harold Bennett. For a brief moment, his eyes met hers. There was no recognition in his expression, not yet, only acknowledgement. It was enough, because Violet understood something Gabriel did not. Some introductions do not happen out loud. They happen when timing is complete. And tonight, though no one in the room would have described it that way, the timing was already in motion. The room had settled into that particular rhythm of curated ease, the kind that exists only when everyone present understands the value of appearances. Crystal glasses touched lightly. Conversations overlapped without interruption. Laughter rose and fell in measured intervals, never too loud, never too spontaneous. It was not a room designed for honesty. It was a room designed for control. Gabriel moved through it with practiced confidence. He greeted Ethan with a firm handshake, exchanged a brief remark with Melissa that drew a polite laugh, and gradually positioned himself closer to the center, where Clara Hastings and Harold Bennett stood. Everything about his movement suggested intention. Violet watched. She did not follow immediately. She allowed space, physical and otherwise. From where she stood near a long table arranged with understated precision, she could see the entire room without needing to be seen by all of it. Observation did not require proximity. Gabriel's voice carried just enough to be heard by those nearby, not enough to appear intrusive. Expansion into the West Corridor is already underway, he was saying, his tone steady, confident. We've structured it to absorb initial delays without impacting long-term returns. Harold Bennett listened. He did not nod immediately. He did not interrupt. He simply held Gabriel's gaze in a way that invited completion before response. Clara Hastings stood beside him, her expression attentive, her posture relaxed. She had hosted enough of these gatherings to recognize the difference between performance and substance. She said nothing. Gabriel continued adjusting his phrasing slightly, refining his language in real time. And of course, the financing structure is aligned with projected growth. We've been in close communication with the bank throughout the process. The word bank was introduced casually, as though it required no emphasis. Harold's eyes shifted just briefly. "Which department are you working with?" he asked. Gabriel smiled, as if the question confirmed progress. "Underwriting and commercial review," he replied. "It's moving smoothly, smoothly." The word settled into the space between them. Harold inclined his head slightly, neither confirming nor challenging the statement. "I see," he said. Across the room, Violet noted the exchange. Not the words, the timing, the pause before Harold's response, the absence of affirmation, the subtle recalibration in Clara's posture. Patterns she had learned often reveal themselves in what was not said. Gabriel, however, did not notice. He was already moving forward, expanding the narrative, reinforcing the impression. "It's a strong partnership," he added. "We're aligned on direction, aligned." Another word that suggested certainty without evidence. Violet shifted her attention briefly to Melissa, who had drawn closer, her expression bright, her interest genuine, but unexamined. "You must be proud," Melissa said to Gabriel. "It all sounds big." Gabriel laughed lightly. "It is," he said. "And it's just the beginning." Melissa's gaze flicked towards Violet, as if expecting confirmation. Violet met her eyes, offering a small, composed smile. "It's an important phase," she said. Her tone was neutral, accurate, and entirely without embellishment. Melissa nodded, satisfied enough, though perhaps not entirely certain why. The conversation moved on. It always did. Time passed in fragments, introductions, exchanges, carefully balanced interactions. Plates were refreshed, glasses refilled. The room maintained its equilibrium, until it didn't. It began with a toast. Clara Hastings, as host, stepped forward slightly, lifting her glass with the kind of ease that drew attention without demanding it. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice calm, measured. "It's always a pleasure to bring together people who understand not just success, but the discipline behind it." There was a soft murmur of agreement. Clara's gaze moved across the room, acknowledging familiar faces, pausing just long enough to include everyone, without isolating anyone. And to those navigating new phases, she continued, her eyes resting briefly on Gabriel. "May your foundations hold as firmly as your ambitions." A few smiles, a few nods. Gabriel raised his glass in response, accepting the moment. "Thank you, Clara," he said. "That means a lot." He stepped slightly forward, not enough to interrupt, but enough to extend the moment. "If I may," he added, his tone light, inviting. Clara gestured subtly. "Of course." Gabriel turned, his posture opening toward the room. "I think it's important," he began, "to recognize the people who stand beside us while we build all of this." His gaze moved deliberately toward Violet. She did not move. She did not look away. He smiled. "Violet has been with me through every stage," he said. "Every risk, every decision." There was a pause, brief but present. And while some things don't always go as planned, he continued, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. "You learn to adapt." The room stilled, not completely, but enough. Gabriel's smile remained. "Not everyone gets everything they expect in life," he said, his voice carrying just a fraction further than before. "Some things just aren't meant to happen." A few people shifted. Ethan's expression tightened slightly. Melissa's smile faltered just for a moment. Gabriel glanced at Violet again. "But you make do," he added almost lightly. "You focus on what you can build, instead of what you can't." The words were positioned carefully. Indirect, plausibly harmless, but the implication was clear. Children, legacy, absence. The room understood. Silence followed, not immediate, not absolute, but spreading. Conversations paused at their edges. Laughter did not return. Violet remained still. She did not lower her gaze. She did not respond. She observed. She noted the exact phrasing, the sequence, the reactions, who looked away, who held eye contact, who pretended not to notice. Harold Bennett did not move. His expression did not change. But his attention sharpened. Clara Hastings lowered her glass slowly, her gaze steady, her composure intact. Gabriel, sensing the moment, attempted to soften it just slightly. Of course, he added with a small laugh. I'm the lucky one, regardless. A few polite smiles returned. Not many. The room adjusted, but not entirely. Something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Violet took a slow breath, not visibly, not in a way that drew attention. Inside there was no surge of anger, no immediate reaction, only clarity, because this was not the first time. It was simply the most public. And public moments, she understood, carried a different kind of weight. They did not disappear. They were witnessed. They were remembered. She turned her gaze slightly, catching the reflection of the room in the polished surface of a nearby mirror. Faces, expressions, fragments of posture, all preserved in a single, still image. She memorized it, not for emotion, for record. Across the room, Gabriel was already moving forward, rejoining conversation, smoothing over the moment with practiced ease. People allowed it, because people often do. But something in the room remained unsettled, not because of what had been said, but because of what had been revealed. Violet set her glass down carefully, the sound almost inaudible, against the soft hum returning to the space. She did not leave. She did not confront him. She did not correct the narrative. She simply remained, and continued to observe. Because what Gabriel had offered the room was not just a remark, it was a statement. One that, like all statements made in public, now existed beyond him. And Violet, who understood the permanence of such things, did not need to respond. Not yet, because the moment once spoken had already begun to do its work. The drive home unfolded in silence. Not the strained kind that demands acknowledgement, nor the brittle quiet that follows argument. This silence was smoother, more complete, like something already resolved, even if nothing had been said. Gabriel kept his eyes on the road, one hand resting loosely on the steering wheel, the other tapping lightly against his leg in a rhythm that suggested leftover energy rather than discomfort. That went well, he said after a while, his tone casual. Violet turned her head slightly, watching the passing lights blur against the window. Yes, she replied. Her voice carried no resistance, no agreement either, just accuracy. Gabriel nodded, as though that settled it. They're receptive, he added. You can tell. Harold didn't push back. Violet considered that. He listened, she said. Gabriel glanced at her briefly, then back to the road. That's how it starts, he replied. Violet said nothing more, because she understood something Gabriel did not. Listening was not agreement. It was assessment. When they arrived home, Gabriel moved through the house with the ease of someone shedding the structure of the evening. Jacket off, tie loosened. A glass of water poured without asking if she wanted one. He did not revisit the moment. Not the toast, not the remark. To him, it had already passed. To Violet, it had been placed. There was a difference. She walked upstairs without speaking, her steps quiet against the wood. The house felt larger at night, the silence stretching into its corners, holding everything that had not been said. Inside her study, she closed the door, not firmly, not gently, just enough. The room was arranged with intention. Clean surfaces, minimal distractions. A desk positioned where natural light filled it during the day, now replaced by a soft lamp casting steady illumination across her workspace. Her laptop was already open. She sat. For a moment, she did nothing, not out of hesitation, but to ensure clarity. Then she began. The first entry was simple: date, time, location. She typed it without pause. Event dinner at Clara Hastings's residence. Her fingers moved steadily, not rushing, not slowing. Statement delivered by Gabriel Whitaker during toast. She did not paraphrase. She reconstructed, word by word. Not everyone gets everything they expect in life. You focus on what you can build instead of what you can't. She paused, not because she needed to remember, but because she was choosing where to end the quotation. Precision mattered. She added context, implied reference infertility, public setting, approximately 1822 witnesses present. She listed names where she could confirm them. Clara Hastings, Harold Bennett, Ethan Cole, Melissa Grant. Others she described by position or relation. Not assumptions, observations. She continued. Audience reaction, noticeable pause. Visible discomfort among multiple attendees. No verbal correction. Her language remained neutral. It always did. Emotion, she had learned, clouded records. And records, when constructed properly, did not require interpretation. They required consistency. She saved the document, not in her general files. In a separate folder, one that had been growing. Earlier entries appeared above the new one, each aligned, each dated, each structured with the same quiet discipline. Previous remarks, subtle, indirect, private. Now this, public. Violet leaned back slightly, reviewing what she had written. Not for content, for accuracy. It matched. She closed the document, then opened another. This one contained financial notes, not from the bank, not directly, but from what she had observed over time. References Gabriel had made. Numbers mentioned in passing. Timelines that had shifted. She cross-referenced. Not because she expected immediate connection, but because patterns often revealed themselves when placed side by side. A phrase from dinner aligned with a statement from 2 weeks earlier. A timeline mentioned casually matched an email she had archived. Not perfectly, but closely enough. She noted it, not as conclusion, as correlation. Downstairs, she could hear Gabriel moving cabinet doors, opening the faint clink of glass, the sound of a television turning on briefly, then off again. He was unwinding, or attempting to. Violet did not join him. Instead, she opened her email. The message from earlier that day remained in her archive. Reloan Review, Whitaker Development Group. She read it again. This time, she focused on a single line. Further documentation required to resolve our identified inconsistencies. Inconsistencies. The word did not accuse. It did not conclude. It simply pointed. Violet closed the email. Then, without hesitation, she created a new note. Cross-reference internal loan review language versus external verbal statements. She began listing. Gabriel's public claim aligned on direction. Internal note documentation incomplete. Gabriel's claim. Moving smoothly. Internal note escalated for additional review. She did not add commentary. She did not label intent. She allowed the contrast to exist on its own, because contrast, when clear enough, required no explanation. Her phone vibrated once on the desk. A message from Melissa. Hey, tonight was a lot. Are you okay? Violet looked at the screen for a moment. Not long. She typed a response. I'm fine, thank you. She did not elaborate. Melissa replied almost immediately. If you ever want to talk. Violet read the message, then placed the phone face down, not dismissing it, not accepting it, just setting it aside. Because talking was not what she needed, not now. What she needed was structure, and structure once built did not depend on conversation. Time passed. The house grew quieter. At some point, Gabriel went upstairs. His footsteps measured his routine, unchanged. He did not knock on her door. He did not ask if she was coming to bed. He assumed she would, eventually. Violet remained at her desk. She opened one final document. This one was different. Not a record, a timeline. She began aligning entries. Dates, events, statements, financial references. She placed them in sequence, adjusting spacing, ensuring clarity. The pattern was not yet complete, but it was forming. And as it formed, something else became clearer, not suddenly, not dramatically, but with the steady certainty she trusted most. This was no longer about a single remark, not even about a series of them. It was about consistency. Between what was said and what was. Between what was presented and what was recorded. Violet saved the file. Then finally, she closed her laptop. The room returned to stillness. She sat there for a moment longer, her hands resting lightly against the desk, her posture unchanged. There was no satisfaction in what she had done. No sense of progress in the emotional sense. Only alignment. And alignment she knew was enough. Because she was not preparing to respond. She was preparing to allow what already existed. To be seen. And when that moment came, it would not require explanation. Only presence. Violet stood, turned off the lamp, and left the room. The door closed behind her with the same quiet precision it always had. Nothing in the house had changed. And yet, something had already begun. The structure of power, when built correctly, rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with titles spoken aloud at dinner tables, nor does it depend on recognition in social rooms. It exists in documents and signatures and systems that continue to function, whether or not anyone present understands who stands behind them. Violet Ellington had been raised inside that understanding. Long before she became Violet Whitaker, she had learned that ownership did not need to be visible to be absolute. Her grandfather had insisted on it, not as a matter of secrecy, but of stability. Institutions he believed were strongest when they were governed by structure rather than personality. So he built accordingly. Hawthorne National Bank had never been presented as a family enterprise. Its leadership distributed its decisions, attributed to committees its direction shaped through layers of governance that made individual influence difficult to isolate. But beneath those layers, there were anchors, trusts, holding entities, long-standing agreements that ensured continuity across generations. And Violet was one of those anchors. Not publicly, not in a way that appeared in press releases or annual summaries. But in the quiet architecture of ownership, her position was not ambiguous. She held majority interest through the Ellington Trust, a structure designed decades earlier, refined over time, and protected by legal frameworks that ensured discretion without sacrificing control. Margaret Ellison had overseen that structure for years. As family attorney, she understood both the letter of the law and the intention behind it. She had worked closely with Violet's mother, and later with Violet herself, ensuring that transitions of authority occurred without disruption. "You don't need to be seen," Margaret had told Violet once during a conversation that took place not long after Violet assumed full control of her portion of the trust. "You need to be correct." Violet had remembered that. She applied it now. Within Hawthorne National Bank, her role was not operational. She did not sit in daily meetings. She did not review individual applications as a matter of routine. That responsibility belonged to the institution's internal structure departments, designed to function independently to assess risk, without influence to maintain integrity, regardless of external relationships. That was the point. Robert Klein, as Chief Risk Officer, embodied that principle. He was not easily impressed. He did not respond to pressure. His responsibility was not to facilitate approval, but to prevent error. When Gabriel Whitaker's loan application entered the system, it had followed the same path as any other. Initial review, preliminary assessment, escalation where necessary. At no point had Violet intervened. She had made that decision early before the file had even reached advanced stages. Conflict of interest was not a technicality. It was a boundary. And Violet did not cross boundaries that compromised structure. Instead, she had formally recused herself from any direct involvement in the review process. The documentation of that recusal existed within the bank's internal records, clear and unambiguous. She would not influence the outcome, but she would remain informed. That distinction mattered. It allowed her to observe without altering, to understand without interfering. And what she understood increasingly was not aligned with what Gabriel believed. The internal reports had begun as routine. Minor discrepancies flagged for clarification, requests for additional documentation, standard procedural steps that accompanied any large-scale commercial loan. But over time, those flags had accumulated, not dramatically, not in ways that suggested immediate failure, but enough to require attention. Robert Klein had noted the pattern. He did not rush to judgment. He did not escalate prematurely. He followed process, reviewing documentation, comparing submissions, requesting verification where necessary. His language in internal communications remained precise. Discrepancy noted between projected revenue and current cash flow statements. Clarification required regarding outstanding liabilities not previously disclosed. Further documentation necessary to reconcile inconsistencies. Each statement stood on its own. Together, they formed a trajectory. Violet had read those reports not as a decision-maker in this case, but as an owner ensuring the system functioned as intended. She did not respond. She did not advise. She simply ensured that the process continued without interference. Because if the institution was sound, it would reach its own conclusion. And if it did not, then the problem was not Gabriel. It was the system. So far, the system was holding. One afternoon, 2 days after the dinner at Clara Hastings's residence, Violet received a brief update forwarded through internal channels she had access to by virtue of her position, not by request. The message was from Robert Klein. Concise, direct. File has been escalated to senior review. Awaiting final documentation. Current status unresolved. Unresolved. The word carried weight, not finality, not failure, but suspension. A point at which the outcome depended not on interpretation, but on evidence yet to be provided. Violet read the message once. Then again, she noted the timing. The escalation had occurred shortly after the dinner. Not because of it, but not unrelated either. Public perception did not drive internal decisions. But character, when observed, often aligned with pattern. And pattern in finance mattered. That same afternoon, Gabriel spoke of the loan again, casually, as though nothing had changed. "They're just wrapping up their review," he said, standing in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone. Standard delays. Violet stood across from him, her hands resting lightly against the counter. "Of course," she said. Gabriel glanced up. "They'll come through," he added. "They always do when the structure makes sense." Violet met his gaze. "Yes," she replied, "when it does." He held her eyes for a moment, as if searching for something, agreement perhaps, reinforcement. He found neither, only stillness. He looked away first. What Gabriel did not know, what he had never considered, was that the structure he trusted was not abstract. It was built, maintained, protected by people who did not rely on assumption. And one of those people was standing in front of him. Not as his wife, not in that moment, but as the majority holder of the institution he believed would secure his future. Violet did not reveal this. Not because she feared his reaction, but because revelation without necessity was noise. And she did not deal in noise. Instead, she returned to her study later that evening, opening the same files, reviewing the same patterns. She added one new entry. Internal escalation confirmed. Status unresolved. No commentary, no conclusion, just placement. Because the truth, she understood, was not something she needed to create. It already existed. It was simply moving through systems, through records, through processes that did not require her voice to function. And when it reached its final form, it would not arrive with accusation. It would arrive with documentation. Violet closed her laptop. The room fell quiet again. Outside, the evening settled into stillness. Inside, nothing appeared to change. But beneath that stillness, the structure continued to hold. And within that structure, Gabriel Whitaker's future was no longer a matter of belief. It was a matter of record. By the following week, The word inconsistency had begun to appear more frequently in internal communications, not as accusation, as pattern. Inside Hawthorne National Bank language was never careless. Terms were selected with restraint, shaped to reflect observation rather than judgment. Inconsistency did not imply wrongdoing. It indicated misalignment, something that required reconciliation before progress could continue. And Gabriel Whitaker's file had not reconciled. It had expanded. Robert Klein reviewed the documents again late Monday morning, his office quiet except for the low hum of climate control and the faint tapping of keys as he navigated through layered reports. He had no interest in Gabriel personally. That was not his role. What concerned him were the numbers. Projected revenue from Whitaker Development Group's West Corridor expansion had been presented with confidence supported by estimates that assumed timely completion, stable market conditions, and uninterrupted funding. On paper, it held. But the supporting documents told a different story. Cash flow statements revealed delays that had not been fully accounted for. Vendor payments had been deferred, some legitimately, others without clear explanation. A line of short-term credit appeared in one document, but was absent from another. None of it individually was disqualifying. But collectively, it raised questions. Robert did not speculate. He requested clarification. An email had been sent 3 days earlier. Subject: documentation request. Clarification required. The response had arrived within hours. Professional, structured, incomplete. Gabriel had addressed some of the concerns, providing updated figures, offering explanations that reframed delays as strategic adjustments. He wrote with the same confidence he used in conversation, fluid, persuasive, designed to move forward. But he had not answered everything. Certain figures remained unverified. Certain timelines remained inconsistent. Robert noted this. He forwarded the file to senior review. Across the institution, the process continued. No one rushed. No one escalated unnecessarily, because in systems designed for longevity, speed was not the priority. Accuracy was. Violet read the updated internal summary that afternoon. She did not open it immediately. She waited until her schedule was clear, her attention undivided. Then she reviewed it in full. The structure of the report was familiar, organized precise, each section aligned with standard evaluation criteria. Risk exposure, liquidity, debt structure, market assumptions, and beneath it all the same quiet conclusion forming. Unresolved. She moved through the document slowly, not because it was difficult to understand, but because she understood it completely. Where others might see numbers, she saw alignment or the absence of it. Gabriel's public statements echoed in her memory. Aligned on direction. Moving smoothly. Final stages. The report suggested otherwise. She did not react. She did not interpret. She placed the document alongside her own records, not merging them, not altering them, but allowing them to exist in parallel. Because comparison, when necessary, should be clean. That evening, Gabriel returned home earlier than usual. His energy was different. Sharper, less controlled. "They're asking for more documentation," he said, dropping his keys onto the counter with more force than necessary. Violet looked up from where she sat. "About what?" she asked. "Standard stuff," he replied quickly. "Clarifications. Nothing unusual." Violet held his gaze. "And you've provided it, most of it," Gabriel said. "They're just being thorough." "Thorough?" The word lingered. "Yes," Violet said. "They are." Gabriel moved around the kitchen, opening the refrigerator, closing it again, as if the motion itself could settle something unsettled. "They don't always understand how these projects work," he continued. "They see numbers, not context." Violet considered that. "Context matters," she said. "It does," Gabriel agreed, turning to face her. "Which is why I've explained it." His tone carried a note of insistence now, not directed at her, but present. Violet nodded. "I'm sure you have." He studied her for a moment as if expecting resistance or perhaps reassurance. There was neither, only steadiness. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "It'll be fine," he said, more to himself than to her. Violet did not respond. Because she understood something Gabriel had not yet accepted, the process had moved beyond confidence. It was now dependent on verification. Later that night, Violet returned to her study. She opened her notes, reviewing the timeline. She had constructed, entries aligned, statements remained consistent. But now, something new had been introduced: external confirmation. She created a new section: internal review, escalation phase. Beneath it, she added, requests for clarification issued, partial responses received, outstanding discrepancies remain. She paused, considering the phrasing, then continued. Observed behavior increased defensiveness, language shifting toward justification. She did not label it as deception. She did not assign motive. She recorded pattern, because pattern, when sustained, becomes evidence. Her phone remained silent. No messages, no interruptions. The quiet allowed her to focus. She opened another document, one she had begun earlier, now expanding. Comparative statements. Public versus internal. She aligned Gabriel's spoken claims with the bank's documented findings. Not to accuse, to contrast. The difference was becoming clearer, not dramatic, but undeniable. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the process continued. Robert Klein received the updated documents from Gabriel's team the following morning. He reviewed them with the same measured attention. Some gaps had been addressed, others remained. He noted the progress. He noted the omissions. Then he made a decision. The file would proceed to formal review. Not denial, not approval. Review. A stage that required complete clarity. And if clarity could not be achieved, the outcome would follow accordingly. He documented the decision, forwarded the file, and moved on to the next case. Because for him, this was not personal. It was procedural. Violet received confirmation of that step later that day. A brief internal update. No commentary, just status. She read it once, then closed it. Across the house, Gabriel was on a call. His voice controlled his tone, persuasive. We're aligning everything he was saying. Just final details, final details. The phrase repeated. Violet listened not to the words, but to the cadence. It had changed, slightly. Enough. She returned to her desk, adding one final note for the day. Status formal review initiated. Outcome pending. She saved the document, then closed it. The room returned to stillness, and in that stillness the pattern continued to form. Not loudly, not visibly, but with a kind of precision that did not require attention to exist. Only time. And when that time arrived, it would not be shaped by belief. It would be defined by what had already been recorded. The recording did not arrive dramatically. There was no sudden message marked urgent, no anonymous file sent without explanation. It came through a controlled channel, quiet, documented, and entirely appropriate for where it was intended to go. Violet first became aware of it through a brief internal note, forwarded to her access layer, not addressed to her directly, but visible within the oversight structure she was part of. Supplemental material received. Subject: Whitaker Development Group. Pending verification. She did not open it immediately, not because she hesitated, but because she understood the weight of what supplemental material could mean. When she did open it, she did so in her study, the same controlled environment where everything else had been reviewed. The file was labeled simply, Event Recording, Hastings Residence. Violet's gaze rested on the title for a moment. Then she clicked. The video began without sound. At first, a still frame of Clara Hastings's living room, the same arrangement she had stood within just days before. The angle suggested a stationary camera, likely part of the home's internal recording system. Not hidden, not covert, standard for a residence of that level. She activated the audio. The room came to life again. Soft conversations, glassware, movement. Then Gabriel's voice. Clear, measured, uninterrupted. Violet watched the sequence unfold, not as a participant this time, but as an observer removed from the moment. The distance changed nothing about the content, but it clarified structure. Clara's introduction, Gabriel's response, the shift in tone, the remark, not everyone gets everything they expect in life. The words carried differently when replayed, less fluid, more deliberate. Without the momentum of the room to carry them, they stood alone. Violet did not react. She watched the entire recording, from beginning to end. Not once, twice. The second time she paid attention to what surrounded the statement. The timing, the positioning, the reactions. Harold Bennett's stillness, Clara Hastings's controlled pause, Ethan's brief glance downward, Melissa's expression tightening before she corrected it. Nothing was exaggerated, nothing needed to be. The recording preserved exactly what had occurred. No interpretation, no distortion, just sequence. When it ended, the screen returned to stillness. Violet did not close it immediately. She allowed a few seconds to pass, not in reflection, but in confirmation. Then she exited the file. The accompanying note was brief. Source verified. Recording captured via in-house system. Chain of custody confirmed. Submitted for review due to contextual relevance. Contextual relevance. The phrase was precise, because the recording in isolation was not evidence of financial misconduct. But it revealed something else. Consistency, or the lack of it. Gabriel's public behavior, his tone, his willingness to shape narrative even at the expense of accuracy, aligned with patterns observed in his financial representations. Not proof, but indication. And in institutional review, indication mattered. Violet closed the file, then opened her own records. She created a new entry. Supplemental material received event recording Hastings residence. Content reviewed. She paused, then added, relevance behavioral pattern consistent with documented discrepancies. She did not elaborate further. The recording spoke for itself. What mattered was placement, where it fit, how it aligned. She archived the file within her structured system, not altering it, not editing it, only ensuring it was preserved alongside everything else. Downstairs, Gabriel was unaware. He moved through his evening as he always did, calls, brief conversations, moments of visible control. If there was pressure, he contained it within routine. But routine, Violet understood, does not remove pressure. It only delays recognition of it. Later that night, his tone shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. They're dragging this out, he said, standing in the doorway of her study. Violet looked up. Who is, she asked. The bank, he replied. They've got everything they need. Violet held his gaze. Do they? She asked. Gabriel frowned slightly. Of course they do, he said. It's just process. The word had become familiar. Yes, Violet said. It is. He watched her for a moment longer, as if trying to determine whether she was agreeing or questioning. He could not tell, because she was doing neither. He exhaled. It'll clear, he said. It always does. Violet inclined her head. If everything aligns, she replied. Gabriel's expression tightened, not in anger, but in something closer to irritation. It does, he said. Violet did not respond, because alignment, she knew, was not declared. It was demonstrated. And demonstration required more than confidence. It required consistency. After he left, closing the door behind him, without fully realizing it, Violet returned to her screen. She opened the timeline again. She added a new marker. Recording integrated. Behavioral consistency confirmed across public and private contexts. Her fingers moved steadily, no hesitation, because at this point, the pattern was no longer forming. It was stabilizing. Each new element did not change its direction. It reinforced it. Elsewhere, within Hawthorne National Bank, the recording had already entered the formal review process, not as primary evidence, but as supplemental context. Robert Klein reviewed it once. Then again, he did not comment on the personal aspect. That was not his role. But he noted the tone, the control, the willingness to shape perception. It aligned with the documentation. He added a brief notation to the file. Supplemental material reviewed. Supports existing concerns regarding consistency of representation. Then he moved forward. Because the process did not depend on any single piece. It depended on the whole. Violet understood that. which is why she did not isolate the recording. She placed it within structure, where it belonged. The house grew quiet again as the night deepened. Violet closed her laptop. The screen dimmed, then went dark. She sat for a moment, her posture unchanged, her expression steady. There was no sense of escalation, no feeling of nearing conclusion, only progression, measured, documented, irreversible. Because what had begun as observation had now become something else. Not action, not yet, but readiness. And readiness, once achieved, did not require urgency. It required patience. Violet stood, turning off the light. The room returned to darkness, and within that darkness, everything remained exactly where it needed to be. Waiting, not for reaction, but for the moment when process would complete itself. By the time Violet scheduled the consultation, the decision had already been made, just not formally expressed. It did not arrive as a moment of anger, nor as a reaction to the party or the recording, or even the accumulating inconsistencies within Gabriel's financial narrative. It arrived as clarity. And clarity, once reached, does not require urgency. Attorney Julia Carrington's office reflected the kind of order that did not need explanation. Clean lines, neutral tones, files arranged with quiet precision. Nothing in the space suggested drama. Everything suggested control. Julia herself matched the environment. She did not waste movement. She did not interrupt unnecessarily. When Violet entered, Julia stood, extended a hand, and acknowledged her with a brief, measured nod. "Miss Whitaker," she said. "Miss Carrington," Violet replied. They sat. There was no small talk. Julia opened a folder. Not thick, not thin, just sufficient. "How can I assist you?" she asked. Violet did not begin with emotion. She began with structure. "I would like to discuss separation," she said, "and the legal boundaries associated with it." Julia's expression did not change. "Understood," she said. "Is this exploratory, or have you already reached a decision?" Violet held her gaze. "I have reached a decision," she replied. Julia nodded once. "Then we proceed with clarity," she said. The conversation that followed did not raise its voice. It did not need to. Julia asked precise questions. Duration of marriage, shared assets, business involvement, potential conflicts of interest. Violet answered each one directly, without elaboration, without omission. When the subject of Hawthorne National Bank arose, Julia paused not out of surprise, but to ensure accuracy. "You hold majority interest?" she asked. "Yes," Violet said. "And your husband's business is currently under review by that institution, yes?" Julia considered that for a moment. "You have recused yourself from the review process?" she asked. "I have," Violet replied. "Formally." Julia nodded. "Good," she said. "That separation must remain absolute." "It will," Violet said. Julia made a note. "Then we maintain two distinct tracks," she continued, "personal and institutional. They must not intersect." Violet inclined her head slightly. "I understand." Julia closed the folder briefly, then looked at her. "Is there any documentation of emotional harm?" she asked. Violet did not hesitate. "Yes." "Structured?" Julia asked. "Yes." Julia's gaze sharpened, not in intensity, but in focus. "Consistent?" she asked. "Yes." Julia nodded again. "Then we proceed carefully," she said. "No escalation, no unnecessary exposure. We allow the record to support itself. That is my intention," Violet replied. Julia allowed a brief pause. "Do you anticipate resistance?" she asked. Violet considered the question. "Yes," she said, "but not immediately." Julia's expression remained neutral. "Then timing becomes critical," she said. "We prepare now. We act when alignment is complete. Alignment." The words settled easily between them. "Understood," Violet said. The meeting continued for another hour. Legal structures were outlined. Documentation requirements clarified. Steps were defined not as actions to be taken immediately, but as sequences to be followed when the appropriate moment arrived. When Violet stood to leave, Julia did not offer reassurance. She offered precision. "Do not confront," she said. Do not disclose prematurely. Let the process carry the weight. I will, Violet replied. They shook hands, and the meeting ended. Outside, the afternoon remained unchanged. Traffic moved, people passed. The world continued without interruption. Inside Violet, nothing felt disrupted, only aligned. When she returned home, Gabriel was already there. He stood in the living room, phone pressed to his ear, his voice controlled but carrying an edge that had not been present before. I've sent everything, he was saying. There's nothing missing. A pause. I understand process, he continued. But this is excessive. Another pause. Fine, he said finally. I'll follow up. He ended the call, exhaling sharply, then turned and saw Violet. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Gabriel forced a small smile. Long day, he asked. Violet removed her coat, placing it carefully over the back of a chair. Productive, she said. Gabriel nodded, though he did not ask further. They're still reviewing, he said instead, dragging it out. Violet met his gaze. They're completing their process, she replied. Gabriel's jaw tightened slightly. It shouldn't take this long, he said. Violet said nothing, because time, she knew, was not the issue. Clarity was. Gabriel moved toward the kitchen, pouring himself a drink with more force than necessary. They're asking for things that don't matter, he continued. Details that don't change the outcome. Violet followed more slowly, stopping just inside the doorway. If they're asking, she said, they matter. Gabriel turned to face her. You're not in business, he said. You don't see how this works. The words settled between them. Not loud, not aggressive, but revealing. Laurent, Violet held his gaze. No, she said quietly. I see how it works. Gabriel looked at her for a moment longer, then looked away, because what she said did not fit the structure he needed, and he did not have time to adjust that structure. Not now. Not when everything depended on it holding. That evening, Violet returned to her study. She opened her documents not to add, but to review. Legal consultation completed. Documentation structured. Institutional process ongoing. Everything aligned. She created one final note for the day. Legal counsel engaged. Separation process initiated preliminary. No disclosure. She saved the file, then closed it. The room remained quiet, the house unchanged. But something had shifted, not outwardly, not in a way that could be observed. Internally, structurally, because Violet was no longer preparing in isolation. She was now positioned. And once positioned movement, when it came, would not be reaction. It would be continuation. Pressure, when sustained long enough, does not always explode. Sometimes it begins to leak, not in obvious ways, not in dramatic collapses, but in small fractures, subtle shifts that reveal more than any single failure could. Gabriel Whitaker had reached that stage. It did not show in public first. It showed in fragments. Emails sent too quickly. Responses that repeated themselves. Explanations that expanded where they should have clarified. Each one on its own remained within the boundary of professionalism. But together, they began to form a pattern that was harder to ignore. Inside Hawthorne National Bank, that pattern had already been noted. Robert Klein reviewed the latest correspondence mid-morning, his attention steady, his pace unchanged. He did not react to tone. He did not interpret urgency as importance. He read for alignment. And the alignment was weakening. Gabriel's most recent email attempted to address outstanding discrepancies. It referenced prior documents, attached updated figures, and reiterated confidence in the project's viability. But it introduced something new. Contradiction. A revenue projection that had previously been described as fixed was now presented as flexible. A liability that had not appeared in earlier submissions was acknowledged but reframed as temporary. Dates shifted, language adjusted. Individually, each change could be explained. Together, they required verification. Robert did not respond immediately. He compared, line by line, document against document, statement against statement. Then he added a notation to the file. Inconsistencies remain unresolved. Additional clarification required before proceeding. He forwarded the note. The process continued. No urgency, no escalation beyond what was necessary, because the system did not react to pressure. It absorbed it. Across town, Gabriel felt the pressure differently. He sat at his desk, the screen in front of him, filled with open tabs, financial summaries, email threads, projections that no longer aligned as cleanly as they once had. His phone buzzed again. Another message. Daniel Reeves. We need to be precise. Some of these numbers don't match prior submissions. Gabriel exhaled, running a hand across his face. They match, he muttered under his breath. He typed quickly. They've been updated, reflecting current conditions. The response came within minutes. Then we need to explain the changes clearly. Otherwise, it raises questions. Questions. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. They're asking too much, he said aloud, though no one was there to hear it. He stood pacing once across the room, then back. This was still manageable. It had to be. He had handled more complex situations before negotiations delays investors who needed reassurance. This was no different. It was just process. He told himself that again and again. Meanwhile, at home, Violet moved through her day without visible change. Her routines remained intact, her schedule precise, her demeanor unchanged. But beneath that stillness, she was observing the same pattern, only from a different angle. Gabriel's tone had shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Where there had once been ease, there was now insistence. Where there had been controlled confidence, there was now repetition. He spoke more often, explained more, justified. Violet noticed. She did not interrupt. She did not question. She allowed him to continue, because patterns, when uninterrupted, clarify themselves. That evening, Gabriel returned home later than usual. He did not remove his jacket immediately. He did not speak right away. Instead, he set his bag down, walked into the kitchen, and poured a drink with emotion that lacked its usual precision. They're still pushing, he said finally, his voice tight. Violet looked up from where she sat. What are they asking for? She asked. Everything, he replied. Details that don't change the outcome. Violet considered that. If they're asking, she said, the outcome may depend on them. Gabriel turned sharply. It doesn't, he said. This is just delay. Violet held his gaze. Then it will resolve, she said. Her tone was steady, unmoved. Gabriel watched her for a moment, his expression caught somewhere between frustration and expectation. You don't understand how this works, he said. The words came out more quickly this time, more sharply. Violet did not react, because she had heard that before, and because it no longer required response. I understand enough, she said quietly. Gabriel looked away first. He took a sip of his drink, then another, as if the motion itself could settle something unsettled. They'll approve it, he said. They have to. Violet said nothing, because necessity in his sense did not exist within the system he was dealing with. Approval was not owed, it was earned, and earning required alignment. Later that night, Gabriel returned to his desk. He opened his email again, rereading the latest request from the bank. The language was neutral, consistent, unyielding. Please provide complete documentation supporting revised projections. Clarify discrepancies noted in prior submissions. He began typing, then stopped, deleted the line, started again. Each version sounded right, and not enough. He hesitated just briefly, then sent the email. Across the city, Robert Klein received it. He read it once, then again. He did not respond immediately, because the content did not resolve the issue. It reframed it. He added another notation. Response received. Clarification insufficient. Recommend formal review conclusion, pending final verification. The file moved forward, closer now, not to decision, but to conclusion. Violet received the update later that evening. A brief notification, no detail, just status. She read it, then placed it within her records. Final verification phase initiated. Her notes had grown, not dramatically, but enough. each entry aligned, each detail consistent. The pattern once forming was now complete, not in outcome, but in structure. She closed her laptop, the screen dimming slowly. The room settled into quiet. Down the hall, Gabriel moved restlessly, his steps uneven, his presence less contained than before. He did not knock on her door. He did not ask if she was awake. He assumed. And assumptions Violet knew had brought him this far. They would take him the rest of the way, not because they were correct, but because he no longer questioned them. Violet stood, turning off the light. The room fell into darkness, and within that darkness, everything remained in place. The records, the process, the structure that did not shift under pressure. Gabriel believed the outcome was still within reach. That confidence, that insistence, that refusal to see misalignment, it had not yet broken. But it no longer held. And soon, without warning, without noise, it would stop holding entirely. Not because Violet would intervene, but because the system, having received everything it needed, was now ready to answer. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10:00 a.m. It arrived without urgency, without emphasis, just a calendar entry formally worded, clearly structured. Loan review. Whitaker Development Group location, Hawthorne National Bank. Executive conference room. As Gabriel read the notification twice, then a third time, his expression did not change. Because to him, this was the moment he had been expecting. Not confrontation, resolution. A final step in a process that had, in his view, taken longer than necessary, but remained predictable in outcome. He adjusted his schedule immediately, clearing the morning, postponing a call, instructing Lena to remain available in case additional documents were requested. "We'll finalize this," he told her over the phone. "Be ready if they need anything." Lena hesitated. "Of course," she said. "Do you know what specifically they'll focus on?" "Clarifications," Gabriel replied. "Nothing new." Nothing new. He ended the call before she could respond further. Across town, Violet had already received the same notification, not as a participant, but as an observer within the institution's governance layer. She did not open the calendar immediately. She waited until the rest of her morning had been completed, her schedule aligned. Then she reviewed it. The structure was familiar. Senior review panel, risk officer present, legal oversight included, standard, appropriate, necessary. Her name did not appear on the participant list. It would not. She had ensured that. Recusal remained intact, but presence in another form remained possible. Violet closed the notification, then opened her notes. She reviewed the timeline not to adjust, but to confirm. Everything aligned. Public statements, internal records, behavioral patterns, documentation. Nothing required revision. She added one final entry. Formal review meeting scheduled. Final stage before determination. Then she closed the file. The morning moved forward. At 9:30 a.m., Gabriel arrived at Hawthorne National Bank. The building stood as it always had, unassuming in its design, precise in its presence. It did not rely on scale to communicate authority. It relied on consistency. Inside, the atmosphere remained unchanged. Quiet, ordered, efficient. Gabriel approached the reception desk with controlled confidence. "I'm here for the Whitaker Development Review," he said. The receptionist nodded. "They're expecting you," she replied. "Conference room B, 3rd floor." Gabriel thanked her, his tone smooth, his posture aligned with the version of himself he presented in every professional setting. He took the elevator, adjusted his jacket, reviewed his opening statement in his mind. This would be straightforward. It had to be. On the 3rd floor, the hallway was quieter. Fewer people, more space. The kind of environment where decisions were made without interruption. Conference room B stood at the end. The door was closed. Gabriel paused briefly, just long enough to settle his expression, then opened it. The room inside was arranged with precision. A long table, minimal decoration, documents placed in front of each seat. At the far end sat Robert Klein. To his right, Harold Bennett. To his left, a legal representative Gabriel did not recognize immediately. Clara Hastings was not present. This was not a social setting. Gabriel stepped inside. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Whitaker." Robert replied, his tone neutral. Gabriel took his seat. He did not ask where to sit. He chose a position across from Robert, centered, balanced, prepared. The meeting began without introduction. Robert opened the file in front of him. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We'll proceed with a structured review of your application." Gabriel nodded. "Of course." Robert continued. "We've reviewed the materials submitted, including recent updates. There are several areas requiring clarification before a final determination can be made." Gabriel leaned slightly forward. "I'm happy to address anything," he said. Robert inclined his head. "We'll begin with projected revenue versus current cash flow," he said. The discussion that followed did not escalate. It did not shift in tone. It remained controlled. Each question precise. Each answer measured. Gabriel responded with confidence, referencing documents, explaining adjustments, framing discrepancies as strategic decisions. But the structure of the room did not respond to tone. It responded to alignment. Harold Bennett spoke occasionally, not often. But when he did, his questions were narrower, more specific. "Can you clarify the difference between the projection submitted on March 3rd and the revised figure from March 17th, he asked. Gabriel answered. "They reflect updated timelines," he said. "Market adjustments." Harold nodded once. "And the underlying data supporting those adjustments?" he asked. Gabriel paused, briefly. "Those are included in the revised documents," he said. Robert turned a page. "We've reviewed those," he said. "They do not fully reconcile with earlier submissions." The words settled. Not confrontational, not accusatory, but definitive. Gabriel adjusted his posture. "They align when viewed in context," he said. Robert did not respond immediately. He allowed the silence to exist. Because silence in this setting was not absence. It was space. For accuracy. For clarity. For recognition. Finally, he spoke. "Context requires consistency," he said. The meeting continued. Each point addressed. Each discrepancy noted. The structure held. Gabriel continued to respond. But something had shifted. Not in the room. In him. His answers, still controlled, now carried a trace of insistence. Not enough to disrupt, but enough to be felt. At 10:42 a.m., the final document was placed on the table. Robert looked up. "We have one final matter," he said. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. He pressed a button on the control panel beside him. The screen at the end of the room activated. A video appeared. The Hastings residence. The dinner. Gabriel's voice. "Not everyone gets everything they expect in life." The room remained still. No one spoke. The video ended. The screen returned to black. Gabriel did not move immediately. His expression did not collapse. It held. But the structure behind it shifted. Robert spoke. "This is not a financial document," he said, "but it is relevant to consistency of representation." Gabriel looked at him. "For what purpose?" he asked. Robert met his gaze. "To understand alignment between stated positions and observed behavior," he said. The words were precise, measured, final. Gabriel's response did not come immediately, because for the first time, the narrative he had controlled had been placed within a structure he did not control. And within that structure, confidence was not sufficient. Only consistency remained. Across the building in a separate office, Violet sat at her desk. She did not watch the meeting. She did not need to. She already knew where it would lead, because the outcome had never depended on a single moment. It had depended on everything that came before it. And now the process was completing itself. The room did not change after the video ended. No one shifted abruptly. No voices rose. No expressions broke into anything recognizable as shock or confrontation. Because nothing in the room was designed for reaction. It was designed for conclusion. Gabriel sat where he was, his hands still resting on the table, his posture intact, but no longer effortless. The confidence that had carried him into the meeting had not disappeared. It had been displaced into something quieter, more rigid, more deliberate. Robert Klein closed the file in front of him, not abruptly, not as a signal, but as part of the process moving forward. "We'll proceed," he said. His tone had not changed. It did not need to, because everything that mattered had already been introduced. Harold Bennett leaned back slightly, his hands folded loosely, his attention still fixed on Gabriel, not with judgment, not with sympathy, but with the same measured observation he had maintained since the beginning. The legal representative to Robert's left adjusted a document, aligning it with the others, ensuring sequence. Order remained intact. Gabriel inhaled slowly. "For the record," he said, his voice controlled that video, "has nothing to do with the financial structure of my application." It was the first time he had framed a statement in terms of record. The first time he had acknowledged the nature of the room. Robert inclined his head slightly. Not directly, he replied. The distinction was precise. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Then I don't see its relevance," he said. Robert did not respond immediately. He allowed the statement to settle. Then he spoke. "This review is not limited to numerical data," he said. "It includes consistency across all representations made in support of the application." Gabriel held his gaze. "My representations have been consistent," he said. Harold Bennett spoke then, not loudly, not sharply, but with a level of specificity that altered the space. "The issue is not whether representations were made," Harold said. "It's whether they align." Gabriel turned slightly toward him. "They do," he said. Harold did not challenge the statement. He simply reached for a document. "March 3rd, he said, referencing the page in front of him. "Projected revenue for Phase 2, $18.4 million. He turned another page. "March 17th, he continued. "Revised projection, $21.2 million. A pause. "No corresponding documentation provided to support the increase." Gabriel responded immediately. "Market conditions shifted," he said. "We adjusted accordingly." Harold nodded once. "And the underlying contracts?" he asked. Gabriel hesitated, only briefly. "In progress," he said. Harold placed the document down. "That is not reflected in the submission," he said. The words were not accusatory. They were factual. Robert spoke again. "There are multiple instances where submitted data does not reconcile with prior statements," he said. "We have requested clarification. The responses received have not resolved these discrepancies." Gabriel leaned forward now. "They've been addressed," he said. "You're looking at them in isolation." Robert met his gaze. "We are looking at them in sequence," he replied. "Sequence." The word held weight, because sequence revealed pattern. And pattern, once established, was difficult to refute. The legal representative spoke for the first time. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, her tone neutral, "are you asserting that all submitted documents accurately reflect the financial position of Whitaker Development Group at the time they were provided?" Gabriel did not hesitate. "Yes," he said. She nodded. "And that no material information was omitted?" "Yes." Her pen moved across the page in front of her, not writing extensively, just enough to record. Gabriel watched her for a moment, then looked back at Robert. "This is unnecessary," he said. "The project is sound. The numbers support it." Robert did not respond immediately. He turned another page, then another, each movement deliberate. Finally, he looked up. "The project may have potential," he said, "but the application as submitted does not meet the bank's standards for approval." The words did not arrive loudly. They did not need emphasis, because they were final. Gabriel's expression held, but the structure beneath it shifted again. "You're denying the loan?" he asked. Robert did not correct him. "Yes," he said. A pause followed, not long, but complete. Gabriel sat back slightly, his hands now no longer resting evenly on the table. "For what reason?" he asked. Robert answered without hesitation. "Insufficient documentation," he said. "Unresolved discrepancies. Inconsistency in representation. Each phrase aligned, each one supported. There was no need to elaborate." Gabriel's gaze moved briefly to Harold, then back to Robert. "This is a mistake," he said. Robert did not respond, because the process did not accommodate that kind of statement. The legal representative spoke again. "You will receive formal documentation outlining the decision," she said, "including the basis for denial." Gabriel exhaled slowly. "And if I resubmit?" he asked. Robert considered the question. "You may," he said, "with complete and verifiable documentation." Gabriel nodded once, not in agreement, in acknowledgement, because there was nothing else to offer. The meeting did not end abruptly. It concluded. Documents were closed, chairs shifted. The structure dissolved not emotionally, but procedurally. Gabriel stood. "Thank you for your time," he said. The words were automatic, required. Robert nodded. "Thank you for attending," he replied. No one extended the conversation. No one offered reassurance, because none was appropriate. Gabriel left the room. The hallway outside felt different. Not physically, but in the way space feels when expectation has been removed. He walked toward the elevator, his steps measured, his posture still controlled. But the certainty that had brought him there no longer existed, not replaced, not yet, just absent. Inside the elevator, he stood alone. The doors closed, the descent began. Across the building, Violet remained at her desk. She had not received the formal notice yet. It would arrive, through proper channels, at the appropriate time. But she did not need it, because the outcome had already been determined, not in that room, not in that moment, but through everything that had led to it. The records, the inconsistencies, the pattern. She opened her timeline. Added one final entry. Loan application denied. Basis documented inconsistency and insufficient verification. She paused, then added one more line. Process completed. She saved the file, closed it. The room remained quiet, unchanged, because nothing in her environment required adjustment. What had needed to happen had happened. Not through confrontation, not through exposure, but through structure. And structure, once complete, did not require acknowledgement. It simply remained. The formal notice arrived the next morning at 9:12 a.m. It was delivered through the same channels as every other decision structured, documented, impersonal. Subject loan determination. Whitaker Development Group. Gabriel opened it immediately. He did not sit down first. He did not prepare. He read. The language was precise. After comprehensive review, Hawthorne National Bank has determined that the application submitted by Whitaker Development Group does not meet the requirements for approval. He continued. This determination is based on unresolved discrepancies in submitted financial documentation, insufficient verification of revised projections, and inconsistency across representations provided during the review process. Each phrase aligned with what had been said in the room. There was no variation, no room for interpretation, only confirmation. Gabriel read it again. Slower this time, as if pace might alter meaning. It did not. Behind him, the house remained quiet. Violet was in the next room. She had already seen the notice, not through his email, through her own channels. She had read it once, then closed it, because nothing within it was unexpected. Gabriel lowered his phone, slightly, his grip tightening just enough to be visible. For a moment, he did not move. Then he turned. Violet stood near the window, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. "You knew," he said. It was not a question. Violet met his gaze. "Yes," she replied. The words settled, not heavy, not defensive, just present. Gabriel took a step forward. "You knew they were going to deny it," he said. Violet did not shift. "I knew the process would conclude based on the information provided," she said. His jaw tightened. "That's not the same thing," he said. "It is," Violet replied. Silence followed, not the quiet of avoidance, the quiet of alignment. Gabriel looked at her more closely now, as if seeing something he had not allowed himself to recognize before. "How?" he asked. One word, direct. Violet considered it, then answered. I understand how the institution operates, she said. Gabriel exhaled sharply. That doesn't explain this, he said. Violet held his gaze. No, she said. It explains everything. He took another step forward. What aren't you telling me? He asked. The question lingered, not loud, but unavoidable. Violet did not look away. She had reached the point where silence was no longer necessary. Not as protection, not as structure, only as choice. And now, she chose differently. I hold majority ownership in Hawthorne National Bank, she said. The words were delivered without emphasis, without pause, without explanation. Gabriel stared at her. For a moment, the statement did not register, not fully. Then it did. What he said. Violet did not repeat herself. She did not need to. Gabriel shook his head slightly, as if rejecting the shape of what he had heard. That's not possible, he said. It is, Violet replied. His expression shifted not into anger, not immediately, but into something less defined. Displacement. You're saying? He began, then stopped, because the implication was already clear. Violet remained still. I recused myself from your application, she said, formally. The process was conducted independently. Gabriel let out a short, incredulous breath. And you didn't think to tell me, he asked? Violet considered the question. No, she said. The answer landed harder than anything else she had said. Gabriel's voice sharpened. You let me walk into that meeting. He stopped himself, then continued. You let this happen? Violet did not react to the tone. I did not interfere with the process, she said. That was my responsibility. Gabriel's hands moved slightly, then stilled. This isn't about responsibility, he said. He searched for the word. This is betrayal. Violet held his gaze. No, she said. It isn't. The words settled. Gabriel looked at her, waiting for explanation, for justification for something that would restore the structure he had relied on. None came. Then what is it, he asked. Violet took a slow breath. Consequence, she said. Silence followed. This time it carried weight. Not imposed, earned. Gabriel looked away first. He moved toward the kitchen, then stopped halfway, as if the direction no longer mattered. You could have told me, he said, his voice lower now, before any of this. Violet did not move. And what would that have changed, she asked. Gabriel turned back. I would have handled things differently, he said. Violet's expression did not shift. Yes, she said. You would have. Another pause, longer, more complete, because both of them understood what that meant. Not correction, adjustment, presentation. And Violet, who had spent years observing the difference, had chosen not to allow it. I didn't want to influence the outcome, she said. Not in your favor, not against you. Gabriel let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but not quite. You influenced it by staying silent, he said. Violet shook her head slightly. No, she said. The records did. The words remained. Because they were true. Gabriel's shoulders lowered, not in defeat, not fully, but in recognition. Something had ended. Not in the meeting, not in the email. Here, in this room, in this moment where nothing else could be reframed. He looked at her again. Differently this time, not as someone beside him, but as someone he had never fully understood. And now he asked. The question was quieter, less certain. Violet met his gaze. Now we proceed separately, she said. Gabriel's expression tightened. You're leaving, he said. Yes. The answer did not waver. He nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging something that had already been decided long before he was aware of it. When he asked, It has already begun, Violet said. Gabriel did not respond, because there was nothing left to challenge, no structure left to hold, only what remained. And what remained was simple. The marriage had not ended in the meeting. It had not ended with the denial. It ended here. Without raised voices, without spectacle, without the need for anything more than truth. Violet turned slightly, moving toward the hallway. Not abruptly, not with finality, but with intention. She did not look back, because she did not need to. Gabriel remained where he was, standing in a space that had not changed. And yet everything within it had. The house did not feel different the next morning. Not immediately. The same light entered through the same windows, settling across the same surfaces. The kitchen remained arranged as it always had been. The hallway held its quiet, uninterrupted lines. Nothing had shifted, except that everything had. Gabriel woke earlier than usual. Not because he had slept well, because he hadn't. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, as if waiting for something to reorder itself. For the previous day to settle into a version that made sense. It did not. The sequence remained intact. The meeting, the denial, Violet's words. I hold majority ownership in Hawthorne National Bank. They did not change shape overnight. He sat up slowly, his movements heavier than usual, not from physical strain, but from the absence of direction. For years he had operated within a framework that felt stable even when it wasn't. He had relied on momentum, on confidence, on the belief that forward motion could compensate for uncertainty. Now that framework was gone. Not dismantled loudly, just removed. And what remained was not collapse. It was exposure. He stood dressed, moved through the routine without deviation. Shower, coffee, a glance at his phone. Messages had already begun to arrive. Ethan. Heard about the decision. Call me, Daniel. We need to talk. Urgently. An unknown number, likely an investor. He did not respond. Not yet. He placed the phone down, his attention drawn instead to the quiet beyond the kitchen. Violet was awake. He could tell without seeing her. The house carried her presence differently, measured, deliberate, consistent. He stepped into the hallway. Her study door was open. Inside, she sat at her desk, her posture unchanged, her attention focused on the screen in front of her. There were no signs of disruption. No visible aftermath. Only continuation. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She did not look up immediately. When she did, it was not with surprise, just acknowledgement. "Good morning," she said. Her tone was the same as it had always been, clear, uncomplicated. Gabriel nodded once. Morning. He remained where he was, as if uncertain whether to step forward or remain at a distance. Finally he spoke. "They've started calling," he said. Violet held his gaze. "Yes," she replied. "They'll pull out," he added. "Investors." Violet did not respond immediately. "Then some will," she said. The answer was neither comforting nor dismissive. It was accurate. Gabriel exhaled. "This isn't just the loan," he said. "It affects everything." Violet inclined her head slightly. "I know," she said. Silence followed, not tense, not strained, just present. Gabriel looked at her, searching not for solutions, not anymore, but for something else. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. "I didn't think it would." He began, then stopped, because the sentence did not have a clear end. Violet waited, not prompting, not interrupting. He tried again. "I didn't think it would come to this," he said. Violet considered that. "It didn't come all at once," she replied. The words settled, because they were true. This had not been a moment. It had been a sequence, and sequences, once completed, could not be reversed. Gabriel nodded slowly. "I see that now," he said. Violet said nothing, because seeing it now did not change what had already been seen before. Across the desk, a folder lay closed. Gabriel's attention moved to it. "What is that?" he asked. Violet glanced down briefly. "Documentation," she said. "For what?" She met his gaze. "For separation." The word remained. Not sharp, not softened, just clear. Gabriel looked at the folder for a moment longer, then back at her. "You've already," he began. "Yes," Violet said. He nodded, again, slower this time, as if aligning himself with a reality that no longer required explanation. "Of course," he said. He did not ask to see the documents. He did not question the process, because something in him understood, perhaps for the first time, that this was not reactive. It was structured. and structure, once in motion, did not pause for reconsideration. "I'll speak to my attorney," he said. "That would be appropriate," Violet replied. The conversation did not escalate. It did not extend beyond what was necessary, because there was nothing left to argue, only steps to follow. Later that day, Violet left the house. Not abruptly, not ceremonially. She moved through each room once, not to linger, not to reflect, but to ensure completion. Her belongings had already been arranged. Minimal, intentional. She carried only what was hers, what had always been hers. At the door, she paused not out of hesitation, but to acknowledge the space one final time. Then she opened it and stepped out. Gabriel did not follow. He stood in the living room watching the space she had occupied, now unchanged and entirely different. The door closed quietly. No sound beyond that. No echo. Just finality. In the weeks that followed, the consequences unfolded as expected. Not dramatically, not all at once, but consistently. Investors withdrew. Some immediately, others more slowly. Statements were issued, formal controlled referencing, restructuring, reassessment, strategic redirection. But beneath the language, the outcome was clear. Whitaker Development Group contracted. Projects have paused. Some were reassigned, others dissolved entirely. Daniel Reeves remained for a time, attempting to stabilize what could be stabilized. But even he understood the limits. Lena Brooks transitioned to another firm. Ethan called less frequently, then not at all. The network that had once surrounded Gabriel did not disappear. It adjusted, because networks, like institutions, respond to alignment. And alignment had shifted. Gabriel adapted. Not quickly, not easily, but gradually. The confidence that had once defined him did not return in the same form. It became quieter, more measured, less certain, more real. Across the city, Violet continued, not with reinvention, with continuation. Her role within Hawthorne National Bank remained unchanged. Her decisions remained structured. Her presence, as always, did not require announcement. She did not speak of Gabriel, not to colleagues, not to friends, not to anyone who might have asked, because the story did not belong to conversation. It belonged to record. And the record was complete. Months later, on an afternoon that carried no particular significance, Violet stood in her office reviewing a report. The window behind her reflected the city steady moving, unchanged. Her desk remained as it always had been, ordered, clear. She closed the report, set it aside, and for a moment allowed stillness to exist without purpose. There was no sense of victory, no satisfaction tied to outcome, only alignment. The kind that does not require acknowledgement, because it exists without it. Violet turned back to her work. The process continued, as it always would, without noise, without spectacle, with the same quiet precision that had brought her here. In the end, nothing unfolded the way people expect when they imagine justice. There was no public reckoning. No moment where voices rose or accusations demanded an audience. No scene that could be replayed for satisfaction. What remained was quieter than that. A series of choices, a pattern that revealed itself over time, and a structure that did exactly what it was built to do, hold, examine, and respond without bias. Gabriel Whitaker did not fall in a single moment. He arrived step by step at the consequences of what he had chosen to ignore. Not just in business, but in the way he spoke, the way he shaped truth to fit his comfort, the way he believed that confidence could replace consistency. And Violet? She never raised her voice. She never needed to. She observed. She recorded. She allowed process to do what confrontation could not. Because dignity, when it is real, does not demand recognition. It simply refuses to be compromised. If this story stayed with you, you can leave a quiet mark of it, perhaps a like or a thought in the comments about where you watched from and what time it is where you are. And if you find value in stories that don't rush their truth, you may choose to stay for the next one.